So there's basically three core fundamentals when it comes to photography. These things are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So I'm just going to draw a little diagram here, sort of explaining what they all do and what they have in common. Yeah, there's a lot more to do with photography, especially things to do with color and composition, but you can almost take any photo if you just know what these three things are and how to change them. So one thing they all have in common is they control how bright or dark your image is. So I'm just going to draw a little timeline sort of here. On the left is your image gets brighter, and then on the right your image gets darker. So a higher ISO will make your image brighter, a lower will make it darker. A longer shutter speed will make it brighter, a quicker shutter speed will make it darker. With a lower aperture, it lets more light in, and then a bigger aperture, as far as the number goes, it lets less light in, so it's darker. So those are basically the three common things that they all have in common, and then they also change their own settings as well. ISO basically controls the amount of grain and the amount of brightness on the sensor. Shutter speed is basically how quick the camera takes the photo, and then aperture is basically the depth and the focusing of the photo. ISO is how much light hits the sensor of your camera. So to put it into simple terms, the lower the number, the less light, the higher the number, the more light. Though the lower the number, the more sort of crisp and darker your image will be, and then when you start to bump it up, it will make your image a bit brighter, but you'll also introduce a lot of noise and haze the more you bump it up. Some cameras have really nice low light sensors which can deal with this high ISO a bit better, but in general you sort of want to keep your ISO low and then change the other features rather than just always bumping up the ISO to make your image brighter, because it does in turn make your image more grainy and less appealing. So the next thing is shutter speed. This is basically how quickly your camera takes a photo. So if I draw a little diagram down here, let's just call this dude Jeffrey. We're going to take a photo of him at 1/5000th of a second on the left, and then on the right we're going to choose a bit longer shutter speed of half a second. So if he's moving during this photo, the one of half a second is going to introduce a bit of motion blur since he's traveled over that half a second. But over 1/5000th, that's super quick, and there's going to be no motion blur, and it's going to be nice and crisp. Also, just realized I spelled speed properly, so look for shutter speed, not shutter speed. But another thing is, the longer the camera takes a photo for, the more light it lets in. So the one on the right will be brighter, whether the quicker shutter speed, where it takes less time to take the photo, will be darker. So the final one, and usually the hardest for most people to understand, is aperture. So imagine aperture basically being the eye of the camera, and you're opening and closing the eyelids of the camera. So I'm going to draw Jeffrey, and then Jeffrey also has a cousin called Bob, which will make him there as well. And I'm going to put them both in the scene with some mountains, and we'll draw a tree and a sun and a river, and then a little pet dog that doesn't really look like a dog, and then a hot air balloon because we can. So we've got both these scenes here. What we're going to do is change the aperture and see what changes in both these scenes. So on the left I've got at 1.4, which is a lower number. On the right I've got 22, which is a bit higher. So the lower the number, the more light gets let in. The higher the number, the less light gets in. Just like all the other ones, it changes the light level. So if we start drawing a top-down view of this scene, we're going to basically have the sun, we're going to have the camera, all the contents, and the mountains and all that sort of stuff. So what the aperture does, it controls basically the depth of field and how much the camera focuses in the scene. So if you have a higher number, let's say 22 for example, that whole scene is going to be completely in focus. But if you have a lower number like 1.4, maybe only one small part of the scene will be in focus depending on what you're focused to. So if I blur out the background of Jeffrey, that's what it's going to look like with that lower number. And then on the right with the 22, that's what it's going to look like with a higher number. More is in focus with the higher number, less is in focus with a lower number. So I've got a bit of a challenge for you all right now. I'm going to draw Jeffrey skating down a hill. He's pretty cool, he likes to skate on the weekends. So what I all want you to do is, once I've finished drawing the scene, I want you to guess in the comment section if it's a quicker shutter speed or a slower shutter speed, and then also if it's a bigger aperture as far as the number goes, if it's like a 22, or if it's a lower aperture, something like 1.4. So keeping in mind, Jeffrey's going pretty fast down this hill, but he's in focus and he's nice and crisp. And then also keep in mind, there's a fair bit of background elements, but they're all blurred out. Just Jeffrey's in focus and he's moving, but we've managed to not capture any motion blur and he's nice and crisp. So try and guess what you think the settings would be for that.